Everyone at the Wildlife Center cheered as Luna, a rare tiger, gave birth to 4 perfect cubs. But when she didn't stop pushing, the vets watched in shock. What came next was something no science could explain. Before we dive in, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this one. Also, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. If you're passionate about the bond between humans and nature, this is the place for you. Now let's dive back into this unforgettable story.
The night was quiet. Only the soft chirps of crickets echoed through the trees. But then, roar! A powerful sound shook the walls of the Creek Wildlife Recovery Center. Dr. Carter Steve jumped from his chair. His coffee spilled onto the floor. He looked at the clock. It was 2:17 a.m. "That's Luna," he whispered. "She's in labor." Luna was no ordinary tiger. She was strong, smart, and rare. She had been rescued 2 years ago and was now about to give birth to her first litter. Dr. Steve rushed down the hall, grabbing his medical kit. As he ran toward the birthing room, he called for his assistant, Nina. "She's early," Nina said, catching up to him. "Are we ready?" "We have to be," Dr. Steve replied. "Luna depends on us." When they entered the room, Luna was already lying down, breathing hard. The lights were dim. Her golden eyes glowed in the dark like twin suns. "She's doing well," said Nina. Heart rate steady, breathing controlled. Minutes passed. Then, the first cub was born. Then the second. Then the third. And finally, the fourth. All 4 cubs were healthy. They mewed softly, crawling toward their mother. Luna licked each one gently. "A perfect birth," Dr. Steve said, wiping his forehead. But then, Luna roared again. Nina's eyes widened. "Wait, that's not normal." Dr. Steve leaned in. Luna's body tensed once more. She was still in labor. "But she's already had 4, he whispered. "Tigers usually don't have more than that." Another roar. Another push. And then, silence. A 5th cub slipped out. But it wasn't like the others. It was bigger. Much bigger. Its fur wasn't orange. It was silver-white. Its stripes shimmered like moonlight. And its eyes were open. Not just open, but focused. The newborn stood on its own and looked straight at Dr. Steve. He gasped. Nina dropped her tablet. "What is that?" Nina breathed. Dr. Steve took a step back. His voice shook. "That is something I've never seen in my entire life." And in that moment, they both knew. This was no ordinary cub. It was something else. Something that would change everything. The room was silent, but Dr. Steve's heart pounded like a drum. The 5th cub stood on shaky legs, blinking slowly. Most tiger cubs couldn't even open their eyes for a week. But this one was already looking around, like it understood everything. "I need to record this," Nina said, fumbling for her camera. Her hands trembled. Dr. Steve slowly approached the cub. He knelt down, careful not to scare it. "Easy now," he whispered. But the cub didn't run. It didn't cry. Instead, it tilted its head and growled softly. Not in fear, not in pain, but in warning. Dr. Steve froze. "This is impossible," he said. "It's walking. It's growling. Its eyes are, look at those eyes." They weren't the usual soft blue of a newborn. They were pale silver, almost glowing. And they were aware. Luna, still lying on the floor, let out a low rumble, not of pain, but of pride. She nudged the 4 normal cubs closer, but didn't move toward the 5th one. "She's keeping it separate," Nina said. "Why would she do that?" "I don't know," Dr. Steve replied. "But something's not right." The 5th cub stretched its limbs. Its body was covered in fur that shimmered under the light. Not pure white like a snow tiger. It had a silvery sheen, like light reflecting off water. Its stripes looked painted on with silver ink. Suddenly, it turned and walked. Yes, walked, to the corner of the room, away from the others. Then it sat down and stared at the door. "Is it waiting for something?" Nina asked. "It's acting like it already knows what's going on," Dr. Steve said. "But that's not possible." They heard footsteps outside. Another vet, Dr. Mel, entered the room with a sleepy look. "Everything okay?" she asked. Nina pointed. "See for yourself." Dr. Mel stared at the cub, then laughed nervously. "All right, nice joke. Who put a fake robot cub in here?" "No one," said Dr. Steve. "That's real." Dr. Mel's face changed. She walked closer. The 5th cub didn't move. It just watched her like a guard. "This can't be," she whispered. "That cub looks devolved." Dr. Steve nodded. "We're dealing with something that doesn't follow the rules of nature." Nina gulped. Should we tell the world? Dr. Steve hesitated. His eyes never left the silver-striped cub. Not yet, he said. Let's study it first. Understand it. He turned to Nina. But keep your phone on. The world will hear about this soon. And when they do, everything will change. The sun was rising, casting golden rays over the Creek Wildlife Recovery Center. Birds chirped outside, but inside, no one noticed. All eyes were on the silver-striped cub. Dr. Steve sat at his desk, fingers flying over the keyboard. He was creating a new file on the center's computer system. At the top, he typed in bold letters. Subject 5, code name, Ghost. He paused and looked at the screen. Then he added a line under it. Status, unknown species. Possibly evolved. On the other side of the room, Nina stared through the observation glass. Luna was resting now, her 4 normal cubs curled up against her belly. But the 5th cub, Ghost, was still sitting alone, staring into nothing, as if deep in thought. He's not even acting like a tiger, Nina whispered. He isn't, Dr. Steve said. That's why we're keeping this under wraps for now. But why? Nina asked. The world deserves to know. Dr. Steve stood up. His face was serious. Because the world might not understand. People fear what they don't know. What if someone tries to take him? Or hurt him? Nina swallowed hard. What do you think he is? I don't know, Dr. Steve replied. But I have a feeling Ghost didn't just happen by chance. He clicked through his files and opened Luna's medical history. There was nothing strange, no signs of sickness, no signs of tampering, no surgeries, no genetic testing. Luna had lived a peaceful life at the center. So how could she have given birth to something unnatural? Suddenly, the door creaked. Dr. Mel walked in, her face pale. We've got a problem, she said. What kind of problem? Dr. Steve asked. Security. Someone tried to hack into the center's cameras. They were trying to get a live feed from Luna's room. Dr. Steve's blood ran cold. Someone knows. But how? Nina asked. I don't know, Dr. Mel replied. But they didn't leave a trace. Just a blinking message that said, we see the ghost. Dr. Steve sat down, stunned. This isn't just about biology anymore, he said slowly. Someone out there is watching. And they're interested in Ghost. Nina stepped back from the glass window. She looked at Ghost, still calm, still staring, still silent. Do you think he knows they're watching him? Dr. Steve didn't answer. Because deep down, he already knew the answer. That night, the Creek Wildlife Recovery Center didn't sleep. Dr. Steve sat in the control room, eyes glued to the security monitors. Every hallway, every door, and especially Luna's room. He watched them all. Beside him, Nina drank her 3rd cup of coffee. Her eyes were red, but she refused to leave. Ghost still hadn't made a sound. He just sat near the edge of the den, watching something. But what? There was nothing there. No movement. No light. Just the quiet hum of machines. Suddenly, the hallway camera flickered. Did you see that? Nina asked. Dr. Steve rewound the footage. A shape had passed by the camera. Fast. Too fast to be human. It moved like a shadow, blurry but tall. What was that? Nina whispered. Dr. Steve didn't answer. He checked the building logs. No one had entered. No doors had opened. But something had moved. He picked up the phone and called the head of security. Double the guards. Especially near Luna's room. Already on it, the voice replied. Meanwhile, in the maternity room, Luna lifted her head. Her ears twitched. She growled softly. Ghost stood. For the first time in hours, the strange cub walked toward his siblings. They were sleeping beside their mother, warm and safe. Ghost sniffed them gently, one by one. Then he looked up, directly at the camera. Dr. Steve leaned forward. He's looking at us. Then something even more shocking happened. Ghost raised one paw and tapped the glass wall separating him from the camera. Did he just? Nina began. Yes, Dr. Steve said. He knows we're watching. He's letting us know he knows. The lights in the hallway flickered again. This time, for longer. Suddenly, the emergency alarm beeped once. Not loud, just a soft warning tone. Zone 3 motion detected, the system said. Zone 3 was the back entrance. No one used it. Dr. Steve switched to the Zone 3 camera. At first, it showed only darkness. Then, 2 glowing red dots appeared. Eyes. The screen went black. Someone's here, Nina said, her voice shaking. Dr. Steve stood up quickly. We're locking down the building. Now. He slammed his hand on the lockdown switch. Doors sealed. Lights turned red. Down in the birthing room, Luna stood over her cubs protectively. Ghost didn't flinch. He walked to the center of the room, lifted his head, and growled. It was the growl of something ancient, something that had just been awakened. The building was in full lockdown. Thick metal doors slid into place, sealing every exit. Red lights flashed across the halls like silent warnings. Dr. Steve's heart thumped in his chest as he stared at the dark screen from Zone 3. Whoever, or whatever, had been watching them had made their move. In the birthing room, Luna growled louder, her body tense, her eyes fierce. The other cubs huddled beneath her belly. But Ghost, he didn't hide. He stood in front of his family, growling toward the wall as if he knew the danger was near. Dr. Mel entered the control room, pale and out of breath. Steve, I just checked the outside motion sensors. And there's no one out there, she said. No footprints, no heat signals. But something is inside the walls. Dr. Steve turned to the screen and switched to the building's thermal vision. Nina gasped. Behind the birthing room wall, something was moving. A large, snake-like trail of heat crept along the pipes, slithering through the metal like it didn't need doors or halls. It's heading straight toward Luna's room, Dr. Mel whispered. Ghost sees it, Nina said. Look at him. The silver cub had his eyes locked on the same wall where the heat trail moved. He took a few steps forward and let out a low, deep snarl. Then the wall shook. Not much, just a slight vibration. But everyone felt it. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed through the building, followed by a strange, hollow howl. Whoa! The sound wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else entirely. The cameras shook. The power flickered. The monitors glitched. Then silence. Nina backed away from the screens. What was that sound? I don't know, Dr. Steve said, his voice barely above a whisper. But it didn't come from any creature I've ever studied. He stared at Ghost, still standing, still guarding. The strange cub didn't look scared. Instead, he looked ready. Outside the birthing room, in the metal pipes behind the walls, the heat signature paused. It hovered, right behind Luna and her cubs. Then crack. The wall split, just slightly, as if being pushed from the inside. But before anyone could move, Ghost leapt forward and slammed his small body against the crack. A flash of silver light burst from his fur, lighting up the room like a lightning bolt. Everyone watching froze. The wall stopped shaking. The heat trail vanished. And Ghost just turned around and walked back to his spot in the corner. He sat. He blinked. And then he smiled. Dr. Steve backed away from the screen, his voice trembling. This cub, he said slowly, just scared something else away. Nina looked at him, confused. Something else? Dr. Steve nodded. Ghost wasn't born by accident. He was born for a reason. And something out there, something terrifying, knows it. The hours dragged by in the control room. The building was still locked down, and every noise seemed amplified. The hum of the generators, the occasional click of a security camera shifting, and the deep, unsettling silence from the birthing room. Dr. Steve paced back and forth. His mind raced. Who, or what had been watching them? Why did Ghost react like that? A soft knock at the door snapped him from his thoughts. It was Dr. Mel. Anything new? Dr. Steve asked, still trying to process what had just happened. No, she said, eyes darting nervously toward the hallway. But there's someone at the front gate. Dr. Steve's heart skipped a beat. Who? It's a man, dressed in black. He says he's here to help. Dr. Steve raised an eyebrow. Help with what? He didn't say. Then what's he doing here? He says he's been watching the center for a while. He knows about Luna and the cubs. Dr. Steve stood frozen. His mind screamed that something was off. Why would anyone, especially someone dressed in black, want to help? We're in lockdown, Dr. Steve said firmly. No one gets in. But he has information, Dr. Mel insisted. He says it's about Ghost. Ghost. The word sent a shiver down Dr. Steve's spine. Where is he now? Dr. Steve asked. He's waiting outside the front gate, near the security cameras. Dr. Steve took a deep breath. This wasn't just any stranger. Someone knew too much. We need to handle this carefully, Dr. Steve said. Gather everyone. We're going to meet him. But stay alert. Nina joined them, looking worried. What if he's dangerous? I don't know, Dr. Steve said. But we can't ignore him. Not with everything happening. As they made their way to the front gate, Dr. Steve couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking right into a trap. When they reached the entrance, a tall man stood there, dressed in dark clothes, his face hidden in shadows. He didn't speak. He just stared at them, his hands clasped in front of him. Dr. Steve stepped forward. "Who are you?" The man's voice was low, calm. "I am someone who has been watching the tiger. The one you call Ghost. How do you know about him?" Nina demanded. The man smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was cold, knowing. "I know more than you realize," he said. "You're not the only ones who've been watching. The world is about to change, and you are in the middle of it." Dr. Steve felt his heart race. This wasn't just about Luna's cubs anymore. This man wasn't just a visitor. He was a messenger. "Come inside," Dr. Steve said. "But no tricks." The man nodded, his gaze never leaving Dr. Steve's eyes. As they walked back inside, the man spoke again. "Your cub, it's not just a tiger." Dr. Steve's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" The man's eyes glinted in the dim light. Ghost was born to fulfill a purpose tied to something older and much more dangerous. The man's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Everyone stood still, staring at him, trying to make sense of what he had just said. Ghost wasn't just a tiger? What did that mean? Dr. Steve cleared his throat. "What do you know about Ghost?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. The man didn't answer immediately. He studied the group as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke. "Ghost is a key," the man said softly. "A key to something much older than your wildlife center. Much older than you can imagine." Dr. Steve frowned. "What does that mean? What is he the key to?" The man smiled, but it wasn't comforting. "A secret that has been hidden for centuries. A secret that many have tried to unlock. And now, the one who can unlock it is here." Nina stepped forward. "What secret? What's so special about him?" The man turned to her, his expression intense. "Ghost isn't just a mutation or a rare birth. He's a product of something ancient, a force that exists far beyond biology, beyond science. He is the result of a genetic pattern that has been lost for generations. And someone has been trying to find him." The room went silent. No one spoke. They just stared at the man, trying to understand the weight of his words. "Who's been looking for him?" Dr. Steve asked, his voice tight. "An organization," the man said. "One that has been watching Luna, watching Ghost since the moment he was born. They've been waiting for this. Waiting for him to reveal himself." Dr. Steve took a step back. "An organization? What do they want with him?" "They want control," the man replied. "Control over what Ghost represents. He's the missing link. The piece that ties everything together. And they'll stop at nothing to get him." The hairs on the back of Dr. Steve's neck stood up. He knew that whatever this man was talking about, it was bigger than anything he had imagined. It wasn't just about the tiger cubs anymore. "What are they going to do?" Nina asked, her voice trembling. "They'll try to take him," the man said. "They'll come for him, whether you're ready or not. And when they do, they won't be gentle." Dr. Steve's mind raced. He thought of the strange heat signatures, the flickering lights, and the mysterious presence in the walls. What had happened earlier wasn't just a coincidence. Ghost had scared something off. But now, it seemed that whatever was after him had only grown stronger. "We need to protect him," Dr. Steve said, his voice firm. "We won't let anyone take him." The man nodded slowly. "I believe you. But you'll need more than just protection. You'll need answers. And to get those, you'll have to follow the trail. You'll have to find the source." Nina looked at the man with wide eyes. "What do you mean? Where do we even start?" The man glanced at Ghost, who was sitting quietly in the corner, his silver-striped coat shimmering in the dim light. "Start with him," the man said. "He's the key. He knows more than he's letting on." Dr. Steve's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, he knows?" The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the observation window and looked at the cub. Ghost met his gaze, his silver eyes glowing softly in the darkness. "He's not just a tiger," the man repeated. "He's something else. And if you want to protect him, you'll need to understand what he truly is." The man's words echoed in Dr. Steve's mind as they stood in the dim control room. Ghost wasn't just a tiger. He was something else. But what? Dr. Steve looked back at the silver-striped cub through the observation window. Ghost sat perfectly still, his eyes gleaming in the low light, as if he were waiting for something or someone. "You said Ghost is the key," Dr. Steve said, his voice tense. "But to what?" The man didn't immediately answer. He just stared at the cub, his face unreadable. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "To a power," he said quietly. "A power that has been buried for centuries. A power tied to an ancient bloodline, one that has been lost to history. Nina looked confused. What bloodline? The man turned to her. You're looking at the last of it, he said, pointing to Ghost. Dr. Steve's breath caught in his throat. The last of it? What do you mean? The man's eyes darkened. Ghost wasn't born just to live. He was born to bring something to light. Something the world has forgotten, but the world needs. There was a heavy silence. Dr. Steve felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. Was this some kind of ancient prophecy? Some secret the world wasn't ready for? We don't have time to wait for answers, Dr. Steve said, finally. If this organization is coming for him, we need to act. Now. The man nodded slowly. You're right. And that's why I've come to help. Help? Nina asked, her voice laced with suspicion. How? Who are you? The man stepped closer. My name is Elias, and I've been tracking this organization for years. They've been hunting the bloodline, looking for the one that would unlock the power. They don't know it yet, but they found him. Ghost. Elias paused, his eyes locked on the cub once more. They'll come for him soon. They've been watching. They've been waiting. A chill ran through the room as Dr. Steve realized just how serious this was. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make sense. The organization, the strange behavior of the cub, the mysterious sounds, they were all connected. But how? We need to hide him, Nina said, looking at Ghost with a worried expression. We can't, Elias said. Hiding him will only make it worse. They'll track him down no matter where he is. We need to make a stand. And we need to learn more about what's inside him. Dr. Steve's eyes narrowed. What's inside him? Elias hesitated. The bloodline, it's not just a human one. It's ancient, linked to creatures older than the world we know. And Ghost, he carries that bloodline. But there's something else inside him. Something that's not just animal. Something that can change the world. Nina felt a knot form in her stomach. So what you're saying is, Ghost is more than just a tiger cub. Elias nodded slowly. Yes. He's the key to everything. Dr. Steve took a deep breath. So what do we do now? Elias' gaze grew more intense. We take the fight to them. We learn everything we can about this power and how to stop the organization from taking him. Suddenly, a loud crash from down the hall made everyone freeze. What was that? Nina whispered. Elias' expression hardened. They're here. The sound of the crash echoed through the hall, sharp and sudden. Dr. Steve's heart pounded in his chest. They weren't just dealing with an organization anymore. They were in the middle of a full-blown attack. Stay close, Elias said, his voice low and urgent. They're here. Nina's face went pale. What do we do? Where do we go? Elias scanned the control room quickly, his eyes locking onto a map of the center on the wall. We have a few hidden tunnels beneath the building. If we move fast, we can get to them before they find us. What about Luna and the cubs? Dr. Steve asked, his voice sharp. We can't leave them here. We won't, Elias said. But we need to move. Now. The alarms blared, sending a wave of panic through the group. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Through the observation window, Dr. Steve could see Luna pacing nervously. She could sense the danger. And Ghost, he sat, staring at the door, his eyes glowing with an eerie awareness. Take Luna to the tunnels, Elias ordered. I'll hold them off as long as I can. What are you talking about? Dr. Steve asked. You're not staying behind. I am, Elias said, his expression hard. You need to keep Ghost safe. I'll slow them down. No, Dr. Steve said, shaking his head. We're all getting out of here. Elias hesitated, but then nodded. Fine. But we move quickly. They dashed through the dark hallways, following Elias as he led them toward the secret tunnels. The air grew colder as they descended the narrow staircase, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick stone walls. Dr. Steve glanced over his shoulder, watching for any signs of pursuit. But the sound of the alarms and the distant shouts grew louder. We need to hurry, Nina said, her voice tight with fear. They reached a large metal door at the end of the tunnel. Elias keyed in a code, and the door clicked open with a soft groan. After you, Elias said, motioning for them to enter. Dr. Steve hesitated for a moment, then nodded. They quickly moved inside, and Elias followed, closing the door behind them. The tunnel stretched out ahead, dark and narrow, disappearing into the shadows. This leads to the old storage rooms, Elias explained as they walked. We'll be able to hide there for a while. But just as they took their first steps, The sound of something heavy hitting the ground echoed from the hall. "They're close," Elias said, his voice grim. "We don't have much time." Dr. Steve turned to Nina, who was holding tightly to one of the smaller cubs. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she said, though her voice trembled. "But we need to get Ghost out of here. He's the only one they want." "I know," Dr. Steve said. He looked back at the door they had just come through. "But we can't let them take him. We have to find out what's going on first." Elias gave him a sharp look. "That's not going to be easy. The organization will stop at nothing. They've been planning this for years." Dr. Steve's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place, but it still didn't make sense. Why did Ghost matter so much? And what was it that made him different from the others? "We have to stay ahead of them," Dr. Steve said. "We need to figure out what they know, why they want him so badly." Elias didn't reply. Instead, he picked up his pace, leading them deeper into the tunnel. As they moved further into the darkness, Dr. Steve glanced over his shoulder once more. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just running from something. They were running towards something much more dangerous. The further they traveled through the narrow, winding tunnel, the more oppressive the silence became. The only sound was the soft echo of their footsteps against the stone floor and the distant hum of the building above them. It felt like the walls were closing in, pressing on Dr. Steve's chest with every step. Elias moved ahead, his expression grim, scanning every corner as if expecting danger to leap out from the shadows. Luna and the cubs, though shaken, seemed to sense the urgency and followed closely. Ghost, in particular, seemed hyper-aware, his silver eyes darting back and forth, his tail flicking nervously. "Do you know what this place is?" Dr. Steve asked, keeping his voice low. Elias glanced over his shoulder. "I do. This tunnel leads to the old, abandoned research wing. It's where they first started studying genetic mutations years ago." "Genetic mutations?" Nina repeated. "Like Ghost?" Elias nodded. "Yes, and much more. The organization wasn't always as covert as it is now. Years ago, they conducted dangerous experiments here. They thought they could unlock something beyond genetics. But when things went wrong, they shut the whole place down. Or at least, that's what they wanted everyone to believe." "Shut it down?" Dr. Steve asked. "Then why is it still here? Why the tunnels?" "The research didn't stop," Elias said, his voice lowering. "They just moved it underground. And they've been waiting for the right moment to finish what they started." The weight of his words settled heavily on Dr. Steve's chest. What kind of experiments had they been doing? And how did Ghost fit into all of this? "How does Ghost fit into this?" Nina asked, voicing the question that had been haunting them all. Elias paused. "Ghost is the final piece. He's the result of something they've been trying to replicate for years, something that they believed could give them control over nature itself. But they were never able to make it happen. Until now." Dr. Steve's heart pounded in his chest. "You're saying they created Ghost?" Elias shook his head. "No, they didn't create him. But they've been trying to control his kind. They've been searching for the last bloodline, the one that could harness the power of the wild, the power to command nature itself." Dr. Steve stopped walking. "Wait, are you saying that Ghost has the ability to control nature?" Elias turned to face him, his eyes hard. "Not just nature. The world itself. Ghost is not just a product of genetics. He's part of something older, something that has been buried for centuries. And those who know the secret have been trying to awaken it. But they didn't expect someone like Ghost to come along. He's the key to unlocking that power." A chill ran through Dr. Steve's veins. If what Elias was saying was true, then Ghost wasn't just a cub. They were dealing with something much larger than they had ever imagined. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind them broke the silence. Dr. Steve's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone. "We have to move," Elias said urgently. "They're close." Without another word, they picked up the pace, hurrying down the dark tunnel. The walls began to close in even tighter, and the air grew colder. As they reached a large, rusted metal door at the end of the tunnel, Elias punched in a code, and the door creaked open with a loud groan. "Inside," he said. "This is where we'll be safe for now." They rushed into the dimly lit room, which appeared to be some sort of abandoned laboratory. Old equipment was scattered around, covered in dust. Papers and files lay abandoned on tables, some of them yellowed with age. Elias went to a cabinet in the corner of the room and pulled out a large, old book. The cover was worn, but the pages inside were filled with ancient text. He opened the book carefully, and turned to a specific page. "This," Elias said, his finger resting on a drawing of a tiger, but not just any tiger. This one had strange markings, and its eyes were glowing with a supernatural light. Dr. Steve leaned in to get a closer look. "What is this?" "This is what they were trying to create," Elias said, his voice low. "The first of the bloodline. The first of many." Dr. Steve's head spun. But if they've been searching for him, if Ghost is the last, what does that mean for the world? "It means," Elias said, closing the book slowly, "that the organization will stop at nothing to get him. And if they do, the world will never be the same again." The dim light of the abandoned lab flickered as Elias closed the ancient book with a finality that sent a chill down Dr. Steve's spine. The silence that followed felt thick, almost suffocating. The gravity of Elias's words hung in the air, leaving everyone in the room with more questions than answers. Dr. Steve's mind raced. The organization, the bloodline, the power hidden in Ghost. Nothing made sense, yet it all seemed to tie together in a way he couldn't fully understand. "What exactly is this bloodline?" Dr. Steve asked, his voice shaky. "And how does it relate to Ghost?" Elias moved to one of the desks, flipping through more papers. "The bloodline is older than anything you've studied. It's not just an animal trait. It's a genetic link to the primal forces of the earth. The first creatures to ever walk this planet were far more than just animals. They were beings tied to the earth's very soul, capable of controlling the elements, shaping the land, and influencing the balance of life itself." Nina shook her head, clearly struggling to follow. "You're saying Ghost is something ancient?" "Exactly," Elias replied. "Ghost isn't just a tiger. He's the last living descendant of a species that could manipulate nature in ways humans couldn't even dream of. He's part of a prophecy that speaks of the return of these creatures to the world." Dr. Steve stepped forward. "A prophecy?" "Yes," Elias said, opening the book again to a page with a series of intricate symbols and a diagram of a large beast with similar markings to Ghosts. "This prophecy was lost, hidden away by the people who first discovered these creatures. It said that when the bloodline is complete, when the last of the creatures is born, the world will be changed forever." Nina frowned. "Changed? How?" "The return of this bloodline is said to bring balance, either to heal the earth or destroy it. The power that Ghost carries isn't just in his genetics. It's in the very essence of his being. He has the potential to either restore the natural order of the world or tip it into chaos." Dr. Steve's head spun. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. Ghost wasn't just an extraordinary tiger. He was the key to something far more dangerous. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from the hallway outside the lab. Footsteps. Low voices. They were getting closer. "We don't have much time," Elias whispered urgently. "The organization is right behind us. If they get in here, it's over. We need to move." Dr. Steve felt his heart race. "Where do we go?" Elias glanced around the lab, then grabbed a heavy, rusted metal panel from the wall. He pried it open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, darkened passageway. "This leads to an underground bunker," Elias said. "It's a safe place. For now." Without waiting for a response, he motioned for them to follow. Luna growled softly, sensing the danger, as Ghost's silver eyes glowed in the low light. Dr. Steve gently nudged the cub along, his heart pounding with each step. They entered the passageway, which was narrow and winding. The air felt damp, and the walls were covered in a fine layer of dirt and dust. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Dr. Steve's mind raced. What did Elias mean by balance? What would happen if Ghost's true power was unlocked? And what did the organization want with him? The sound of footsteps grew louder behind them. Elias glanced back, his face set in determination. "They're close," he muttered. "We have to hurry." The passageway led them into a small, dimly lit room. It was cold, and the air smelled stale, as though it hadn't been used in years. The walls were lined with old storage crates and equipment, but there was a large metal door on the far side of the room. Elias moved quickly, his hands shaking slightly as he worked to unlock the door. "This is it," he said, turning the key in the lock. "We'll be safe here, at least for now." The door creaked open, revealing a small, reinforced bunker beyond. Dr. Steve took one last look behind them before stepping inside. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud. "We're safe for the moment," Elias said, breathing heavily. But we don't have much time. They won't stop coming for Ghost. And when they find us... He didn't finish his sentence, but the fear in his eyes spoke volumes. Dr. Steve glanced at Ghost, who was now sitting quietly on the floor, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark room. There was so much more to learn, but they couldn't stay here forever. What now? Nina asked, breaking the silence. Elias exhaled slowly. Now we prepare. The organization is going to launch an attack. They'll come for Ghost, and they won't stop until they have him. We need to uncover the rest of the prophecy and figure out how to protect him. Dr. Steve nodded, his mind racing with the new information they had uncovered. Ghost wasn't just a tiger. He was something much more, a force of nature. And if the organization got their hands on him, everything could change. The world could be on the edge of something extraordinary or catastrophic. The bunker walls were thick and cold, but they couldn't block the deep unease that hung in the air. It was quiet, too quiet. Dr. Steve sat on a metal crate, staring at Ghost. The cub was curled up, but his eyes remained wide open, alert, glowing in the dim light like a pair of silver moons. He hadn't made a sound since they entered the bunker, and that silence made Steve more nervous than any roar ever could. Nina paced back and forth, glancing at the heavy door. What if they've already found the entrance to the tunnels? They haven't, Elias said calmly, flipping through the ancient book. Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. Dr. Steve ran a hand through his messy hair. There's something you're not telling us, Elias. I can feel it. Elias looked up, the candlelight flickering across his tired face. You're right. He stood slowly, walked over to one of the crates, and opened it. Inside, wrapped in layers of old cloth, was a small wooden box. He carefully lifted the lid and revealed a strange-looking stone, dark, with glowing cracks that pulsed like a heartbeat. What is that? Nina whispered. This, Elias said, is called the Whispering Stone. It's a piece of the Earth's core, taken long ago by a group of monks who studied the ancient bloodlines. They believed it held the voice of nature itself, and that it could speak to the Chosen One. Dr. Steve's eyes widened. You mean? Ghost? Elias nodded. If Ghost is truly the last of his kind, this stone will recognize him. It will tell us what his purpose is. Nina frowned. You mean the stone talks? In a way, Elias said. Not with words. With images. Feelings. Visions. But only to the one who carries the mark. Without hesitation, Elias placed the stone gently in front of Ghost. The cub stared at it, unmoving. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly, Ghost's eyes flickered, and he sat upright. His pupils narrowed. The air in the room shifted, growing colder, heavier. The stone began to glow brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat in perfect rhythm with the cub's breathing. Dr. Steve stood up slowly. Is this normal? No, Elias said. This is far beyond what I expected. Ghost lowered his head and touched the stone with his nose. The room went completely dark. Then, images began flashing in Dr. Steve's mind. He saw towering forests filled with glowing creatures. He saw fire sweeping across dry lands, rivers turning black, and cities crumbling under the weight of nature's wrath. And then, he saw Ghost, fully grown, his silver-white coat shining under a blood-red sky, standing on a mountain, roaring so loud that the earth itself cracked. The vision vanished. The room's light returned. The candle flickered weakly. Everyone was silent. Even Ghost looked stunned. What did we just see? Nina asked, her voice barely a whisper. The future, Elias said quietly. Or one of them. Dr. Steve swallowed hard. That roar, that destruction. Is Ghost going to cause it? No, Elias replied. But if the wrong hands control him, he could. Dr. Steve dropped onto the crate again, shaking his head. So he really is a weapon? No, Elias said firmly. He's not a weapon. He's a warning. Before anyone could say another word, the heavy door to the bunker shook with a violent bang. Dust rained down from the ceiling. They're here, Elias muttered, grabbing the book and the Whispering Stone. They found us. Ghost stood up slowly, stepping between the group and the door. The shadows on the walls seemed to move, whispering in a language no one could understand, except maybe him. The countdown had begun. The door to the bunker trembled again, this time louder, harder. A metal clang rang through the room like a bell of doom. Dust floated down from the ceiling, and the lights flickered dangerously. They're trying to break in. Nina shouted, Backing away from the door, Dr. Steve rushed to Luna, who was standing protectively in front of her cubs, including Ghost. She growled low in her throat, her ears flat, ready to fight. "Elias, what do we do?" Steve demanded. Elias didn't answer at first. He stared at the door, his eyes narrowed. "We don't have much time. If they get in here, they'll take Ghost, and everything will fall apart. But there's one thing they don't know." "What's that?" Nina asked. Elias turned, holding up the whispering stone. "Ghost is ready." As if understanding the words, Ghost stepped forward. His silver-white fur shimmered with energy. The symbols on the stone began to glow again, but this time, a faint silver light moved across Ghost's body, forming ancient runes along his fur. It was like watching a warrior put on armor made of magic. The banging on the door turned to a high-pitched grinding sound. "They're cutting through," Elias said. "We have minutes, maybe less." Dr. Steve moved toward the back of the bunker. "Is there another exit?" "No," Elias replied. "But there's something else. A way to protect Ghost." He pulled out a metal cylinder from behind a crate. "It's an old escape pod, meant to send research samples out of dangerous areas. It won't fit all of us, but it will get Ghost and one person out. They'll end up on the forest edge, miles from here." "We're not leaving him alone," Nina said quickly. "I'll go," Dr. Steve said. "He trusts me, and I trust him." The floor shook as sparks burst from the hinges on the door. Elias nodded. "Then hurry. We'll hold them off." Dr. Steve knelt beside Ghost. "We're going to get out of here, buddy. And when we do, we'll stop them. Together." Ghost stared at him, then gently nuzzled Steve's hand. Dr. Steve climbed into the pod, motioning for Ghost to follow. The moment the cub stepped inside, the runes on his fur glowed brighter, as if responding to something deep underground. Elias slammed the hatch closed. "We'll meet you at the safe house in the valley," he said. "Follow the stars and the wind. The forest will guide you." The moment he hit the launch button, the pod roared to life and shot down the hidden tunnel beneath the bunker. Boom. The door crashed open behind them, just as the pod vanished into the earth. Inside the pod, Dr. Steve held tight as they sped through the underground launch tube. Dust flew past the window. The hum of the engine echoed like thunder. "Hang in there, Ghost," he whispered. "We're not done yet." Then everything went dark. When Dr. Steve opened his eyes, the pod was still. Everything around him was quiet, too quiet. A thin crack ran across the glass dome above him, and soft rays of early morning sunlight filtered through the trees. "Ghost," he whispered. The silver-white cub stirred beside him, unharmed. His eyes slowly opened, calm, alert, glowing faintly in the dim light. Dr. Steve pushed the hatch open and climbed out. They had landed in the middle of a dense forest. The air was cool and damp. Strange sounds echoed from the trees, whispers, rustles, distant calls. The forest was alive, but not in the normal way. It watched them. "This must be the valley Elias talked about," Steve muttered. "The one the prophecy mentioned." Ghost jumped out of the pod and sniffed the ground. His ears twitched. Then he looked toward a narrow path hidden beneath the roots of a giant tree. Without hesitation, he began walking that way. "You know where to go?" Steve asked, stunned. Ghost didn't answer, of course. But something about the way he moved told Steve this wasn't just instinct. It was something deeper. A connection to the forest. To the earth. Steve followed, stepping carefully over twisted roots and mossy stones. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew taller, their bark marked with glowing carvings. The light above dimmed, and the air thickened with a sweet, ancient smell. It felt like they had entered another world. "Are we still on Earth?" Steve whispered. Suddenly, Ghost stopped. His ears perked. A soft growl escaped his throat. From behind the trees, shapes began to move. Not animals. Not humans. Something in between. The first one stepped out. A creature with the body of a panther, but with feathers instead of fur. Its eyes glowed green, and its claws left sparks on the ground. Steve stepped back. "What are those?" Ghost didn't growl this time. He stood tall, facing the creatures without fear. Then, one by one, the beings bowed. Steve's mouth fell open. "They're bowing to him." A voice echoed through the trees, not with words, but with thoughts. "He is the one, the last guardian." Steve turned in a circle, trying to find the source, but there was no one. The forest remembers. The earth welcomes him. But the shadows are near. A soft wind swept through the clearing, and the creatures disappeared back into the trees as if they had never been there. Ghost turned and looked at Steve again, his eyes more serious than ever before. Steve swallowed. You really are something special, huh? Just then, the sound of a distant explosion shook the ground. Steve turned toward the noise. They're not far behind. Ghost's eyes narrowed. He growled low, not in fear, but in warning. The hunters were coming. But this time, Ghost wouldn't run. This time, the forest would fight back. Deep in the heart of the ancient forest, Ghost stood perfectly still. His silver-white coat shimmered in the filtered sunlight. The wind shifted slightly, carrying with it a new scent, danger. Dr. Steve heard it too. Faint footsteps. Distant voices. The hunters were coming. They found us, he whispered. But Ghost didn't move. Instead, he growled softly, then raised his head to the trees above. A sound answered, a soft creaking, like branches shifting in agreement. The forest had heard him. Suddenly, the air grew thick. The trees rustled without wind. Shadows danced under the leaves. The very ground beneath them seemed to hum with energy. Steve looked around, eyes wide. What's happening? Then, from behind a nearby hill, a team of black-clad hunters stepped into view, 5 of them. Each carried high-tech gear, and their eyes were locked on Ghost. There, one of them shouted. That's the cub. Take him alive. But before they could move, the forest reacted. Vines shot up from the ground like snakes, wrapping around the hunters' legs. Trees bent unnaturally, blocking their path. The ground cracked open beneath one of them, sending him tumbling into a hidden pit of mud. What the? One hunter screamed, trying to cut the vines, but they kept growing back, faster, thicker, stronger. The leader shouted, Use the gas. Another reached for a canister, but before he could throw it, something landed beside him. A glowing creature, like the feathered panther Steve had seen earlier. It roared, sending out a wave of sound that knocked the hunters to their knees. Ghost remained still, watching it all. Dr. Steve turned to him, stunned. You're controlling the forest, aren't you? Ghost's eyes glowed brighter. Not just in power, but in understanding. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the chaos ended. The vines loosened. The creatures disappeared. The forest went quiet again. The hunters were gone, either unconscious or swallowed by the woods. Dr. Steve stepped back in awe. I don't believe it. You're not just a part of the forest. He looked at Ghost. You are the forest. Ghost walked forward, sniffing the ground where the hunters had been. His tail flicked once, and he let out a small huff, almost like a sigh. Steve looked around. The clearing was peaceful again. They'll send more. But just then, a bird with wings that glowed like fire landed nearby, carrying a scroll tied to its leg. Steve carefully took the scroll and unrolled it. It was from Elias. The organization has taken the sanctuary. Nina and I escaped, but not for long. Ghost must reach the crystal cavern before the next full moon. It is the only place powerful enough to awaken his true form. Hurry. The world is shifting. Steve looked up, his face pale. They've taken everything, Ghost. But if we make it to the crystal cavern, we might still have a chance. Ghost looked to the north, then took the lead again, faster this time, with purpose. The prophecy was not just a warning. It was a countdown. Ghost moved swiftly through the forest, his silver coat glowing faintly beneath the shadows of the tall trees. Dr. Steve followed closely, brushing past thorny vines and ducking under twisted branches. The forest was no longer hostile. It was guiding them now, opening paths that hadn't existed moments before. Every step deeper into the woods felt like stepping into the pages of a forgotten story. Trees whispered secrets in the wind, glowing stones marked their trail, and the air carried a hum, like a soft song only Ghost could understand. How far is the crystal cavern? Steve asked, panting from the fast pace. Ghost paused at the edge of a shallow river. Then he looked up toward the mountain range in the distance, where dark clouds gathered around a single peak. That was their destination. Steve sighed. Great. Mountains. They crossed the river using a fallen tree, but halfway across, Steve slipped. Ghost turned quickly and grabbed his jacket with his teeth, pulling him to safety. Steve landed with a thud on the other side and laughed nervously. Guess you really are my bodyguard now. Ghost wagged his tail slightly before trotting ahead again. As they moved through the narrowing trail, the forest began to change once more. The colors faded to grays and silvers. No birds sang. No animals moved. Then Steve noticed it. There were no footprints. Not even theirs. Wait, he said, stopping. We've been walking, but the ground is untouched. Ghost also stopped, ears twitching. He sniffed the air, then growled. The trees ahead formed a perfect archway, so perfect it looked unnatural. This doesn't feel right, Steve muttered. Before they could turn back, a low rumble filled the ground. The air shimmered. Then, out of the archway, came a figure. It looked like a tiger, but made entirely of smoke. Its eyes were hollow. It made no sound as it stepped forward, blocking their path. Ghost stepped in front of Steve and let out a deep growl, louder than any sound he'd made before. The forest around them seemed to tremble. The smoky tiger let out a silent roar. Its mouth opened wide, revealing swirling darkness inside. Then Ghost roared back, his silver runes lighting up brighter than ever. The ground split between them, and a glowing line of energy shot from Ghost's paws, striking the smoke creature and slicing it in half. The figure let out a final, ghostly shriek as it dissolved into the wind. Silence. Steve exhaled. What was that? A soft voice echoed from the trees. Not human, not animal. That was a memory. A test. The path of echoes shows the fears of the chosen. Steve turned in a slow circle. Who's there? The forest speaks to those who walk with purpose. Ghost stepped forward, his tail raised high. The archway remained, but now it pulsed with a soft silver light. I guess that was only the first test, Steve said, walking beside the cub. Let's hope the rest of this path doesn't include any more smoky monsters. They passed through the archway together, and suddenly, everything changed again. The colors returned, but now the forest was lit by golden light. The mountain was closer. Much closer. Steve looked around in wonder. Did we just skip miles? Ghost glanced up at him. Steve nodded slowly. Right. Magic forest. Got it. But as they continued walking, the sun dipped low in the sky. And far behind them, beyond the whispering trees, a dark shadow watched and followed. The hunters weren't done, and they were no longer alone. By the time the stars blinked into the sky, the forest had grown cold. Frost clung to the edges of the trees, even though it wasn't winter. Dr. Steve rubbed his arms as he and Ghost climbed a rocky slope that led out of the woods. Ahead of them, a narrow cliff path wound along the mountain's edge. Ghost paused and looked up. The moon, almost full, hung just above the peak. The crystal cavern must be near, Steve whispered. We're close. But as the two pushed forward, a dark shape slipped between the trees behind them. Far above, from a ledge carved into the rock, someone watched through high-tech binoculars. A voice crackled through a headset. Target located. Silver Cub and the scientist are heading toward the peak. Prepare for capture. At the base of the mountain, black vans rolled silently into position. Drones buzzed overhead like angry insects, invisible to the human eye. But Ghost's ears twitched. He heard them. Suddenly, he froze and stared up at the sky. A faint hum, mechanical, unnatural, grew louder. What is it, boy? Steve asked. Ghost growled low. Then the first drone dropped. It crashed into the ground, sparks flying. The forest reacted instantly. From the trees, animals began to emerge, not ordinary ones. Creatures that had only existed in ancient legends. A deer with eyes like fire, an owl with crystal feathers, and a serpent that glided over the ground like wind. They didn't speak, but they circled Ghost, protecting him. Then they turned toward the skies. More drones fell. 1, 2, 3, each one taken down by a blast of invisible energy from the strange beasts. Steve ducked behind a boulder. Are these creatures protecting us? Ghost stepped onto a rock and raised his head. He let out a soft, vibrating hum, not a roar, but a sound filled with power. The animals around him responded with nods and screeches. And then silence. They're gone, Steve said, peeking out. But Ghost didn't move. He stared down the path. From the shadows at the tree line, they came. A new group of hunters. Different from before. Not just soldiers, but ones cloaked in something darker. Their eyes glowed faint red behind their masks. One of them carried a long staff that pulsed with sickly green light. The leader stepped forward and removed his helmet. Steve gasped. General Kale. He was the man responsible for the collapse of the original sanctuary. The one who had hunted rare creatures for sport and power. Give me the cub, Kale said, voice calm. You don't know what you're carrying. Steve stepped in front of Ghost. I know exactly who he is. Kale smirked. Do you? That creature is more than nature's miracle. He's a key to a gate no one should ever open. Behind Kale, a new machine whirred to life. It looked like a giant cube of metal and light, its surface shifting and changing. Steve stared. What is that? Kale answered without emotion. A portal. The cavern doesn't just hold crystal. It holds the ancient power of the Earth's heart. And with him, he pointed to Ghost. I will control it. Ghost stepped forward now, his body glowing brighter than before. The markings on his fur shimmered with silver flame, and the wind whispered around them. He is the gatekeeper. He chooses who enters. Kale raised his hand. Take them. The final battle had begun. But this time, Ghost wouldn't run. This time, he would awaken. The wind howled around the mountain peak as the hunters advanced, dark armor gleaming under the moonlight. Ghost stepped forward, standing between Dr. Steve and the attackers. His silver-white coat shimmered, the glowing markings across his body pulsing like a heartbeat. Kale raised his staff. Take the cub. Bring me the key. The hunters charged. But the earth responded. Suddenly, the ground beneath Ghost cracked open. Light burst from the stone, pure, blinding, ancient. It wasn't fire or lightning. It was something older, something alive. Steve shielded his eyes. What's happening? Ghost let out a roar, louder and deeper than ever before. It echoed off the mountain walls and through the valley below. Every tree, every stone, every creature seemed to pause. And then the mountain moved. Behind Ghost, the cliffside split in two, revealing a massive entrance shaped like the jaws of a tiger. Inside, a glowing cavern shimmered with crystals that lit the walls in colors Steve had never seen before. The crystal cavern, he whispered. But there was no time to admire it. The hunters were still coming. Ghost didn't hesitate. He charged, not away, but toward them. The first hunter raised a weapon, but it exploded in his hands before he could aim. The second was knocked off his feet by a blast of wind that spun around Ghost like a shield. Kale stepped forward, his staff glowing green. He pointed it at Ghost, and vines, twisted and dark, shot out like snakes, wrapping around the cub's legs. You are powerful, Kale growled. But still just a creature. Ghost struggled, but then his eyes flared. The silver markings on his body ignited, not with fire, but with light. The vines turned to dust. The air cracked. And then, from deep inside the cavern, a voice, echoing, ancient, yet gentle, spoke. You have awakened the flame. Enter, Guardian. Ghost turned and bolted into the cavern. Steve followed, heart racing. The hunters chased them, but as Kale reached the entrance, the stone jaws snapped shut. Boom. Silence. Inside, Steve stood with Ghost in the heart of the crystal cavern. The walls shimmered, and the ceiling sparkled like a sky full of stars. At the center stood a pedestal of glowing stone. On it rested a crystal in the shape of a teardrop, floating above the surface. Ghost approached it slowly, as if drawn by something he'd always known but never seen. Steve whispered, Is that what you were born for? Ghost touched the crystal with his nose. A flash of light burst from the cavern, blue, white, and gold. Steve fell to his knees, covering his face. And when he looked up, Ghost was no longer a cub. He stood tall now, twice the size. Still a tiger, but something more. Wings of light shimmered from his back. His eyes glowed with deep wisdom. The silver markings had become armor, and a soft crown of crystal floated just above his head. Steve gasped. Ghost? The tiger looked at him. Then a voice, not from outside, but inside Steve's mind, spoke. I remember now. I was born for this. The cavern pulsed with energy. The gate had been opened, but so had the final challenge. Behind the sealed wall, Kale was preparing his final move. The fate of Earth, the ancient power, and the Guardian's future hung in the balance. The end was near, and it would change everything. Outside the crystal cavern, the storm raged. Thunder cracked across the sky as General Kale stood before the sealed stone jaws, his eyes burning with fury. Around him, his hunters scrambled to set up powerful explosives and energy weapons. Open it, Kale ordered. Now. But sir, the mountain, it's alive. Every time we try to. Kale grabbed the nearest soldier by the collar. That cub is the key. We open this gate, or we die trying. Inside the cavern, Ghost, now transformed into the Guardian, stood silently before the floating crystal. His silver armor shimmered with light, his wings of energy folding gently behind him. Dr. Steve looked up at him, awestruck. I can't believe it. You're not just a creature of legend. You're the legend. Ghost turned to him and spoke, not with words, but with thoughts. You believed when others didn't. That is why you are still here. Suddenly, the crystal flickered, and the walls of the cavern lit up with moving images, memories. A younger ghost, still unborn, was shown inside Luna's womb, surrounded by strange light. Then, the ancient Earth. Long ago, when guardians protected the balance of nature. Then, a prophecy. The silver flame shall return when the Earth is in danger. One shall rise to seal the darkness once more. Steve stepped back. So, Kale? He wants to use the cavern to unleash the darkness? Ghost nodded. This cavern is a heart. It can give life or destroy it. Then, the stone jaws shook violently. Boom, boom. They're breaking in. Steve cried. Ghost stepped forward. The floating crystal lowered until it hovered before him. With a single touch of his paw, the entire cavern began to glow, and the stone jaws shattered open. Kale entered, flanked by his soldiers. He paused when he saw Ghost, no longer a cub, but a force of nature. So it's true, Kale said quietly. You were born for this. He raised his glowing staff. But I was made for this. The staff fired a beam of dark green energy, but Ghost raised his paw, and the beam stopped mid-air, frozen like glass. Kale snarled. You think light is stronger than power? Ghost growled, then lunged. A battle exploded across the cavern. The guardians of the forest burst from the walls, the glowing owl, the crystal deer, the serpent of wind. They joined Ghost, fighting back Kale's soldiers. Steve ducked behind a boulder, watching in awe. Kale summoned shadows, each shaped like a beast of nightmare. Ghost met them head-on, using not just strength, but light, wisdom, and speed. Then Kale made one final move. He aimed the staff directly at the floating crystal. No, Steve shouted. But Kale struck it. The cavern shook. Crystals shattered. A black hole began to open beneath the pedestal. Ghost turned to Steve. Run. Now. But Steve didn't move. I'm not leaving you. Ghost leapt onto the pedestal, his entire body blazing with silver flame. With one roar, he released all his power into the crystal. Light exploded outward. Kale screamed, his body consumed by the blast. The shadows were wiped away. The black hole sealed. The cavern fell still. Silence. Then, a faint glow. Ghost stepped down from the pedestal. He was wounded, breathing hard. But he was alive. Steve ran to him. You did it. You saved us. Ghost looked out at the cavern. The floating crystal was gone. In its place, a tree began to grow, tall, glowing, eternal. A voice echoed. The guardian has returned. Balance is restored. Steve smiled. What now? Ghost looked toward the forest, then to the skies. Now, I protect. Forever. The sun rose slowly over the mountain, golden rays bathing the land in warm light. Where once there was darkness and fear, now there was peace. The forest that had shivered in silence for so long was alive with sound. Birds chirped, leaves rustled in soft winds, and the earth itself seemed to breathe easier. Dr. Steve stood at the entrance of the crystal cavern, now sealed again with glowing vines and living stone. The tree that had sprouted from the pedestal stood tall inside, its roots glowing softly, its branches brushing the roof like fingers touching the sky. Ghost sat beside him, calm, proud, and changed forever. You've done it, Steve said, placing a hand on Ghost's shoulder. The world is safe because of you. Ghost's silver coat shimmered in the morning sun. The fiery markings on his body were calmer now, like quiet waves instead of burning stars. His wings had faded, but a soft light still surrounded him, a reminder of the power he now carried within. He looked at Steve, and a gentle thought passed between them. You were the first to see me, not as a beast, but as a being. Thank you. Steve nodded, eyes misty. So what now? Will you stay here forever? Ghost turned his head toward the deep forest, where whispers of other ancient places called, where lost creatures and forgotten lands waited for protection. I must go where I'm needed. I was born to guard the balance, not just here, but everywhere. Steve smiled. You'll always have a home here. Ghost pressed his forehead gently to Steve's, and for a moment, the man felt a pulse of warmth, a connection that would never break. Then Ghost turned and ran, through the forest, across the river, over the hills. Animals stepped aside, bowing their heads as he passed. The earth opened silent paths for him. He disappeared into the wild where no map could reach. Back at the sanctuary, the world began to heal. The news of Luna's cubs, and especially Ghost, spread far and wide. But Steve protected the secret of the cavern and the crystal. He knew the world wasn't ready to understand. Instead, he wrote everything down, not in a report, but in a story, a tale for the next generation, one filled with wonder, mystery, and a silver tiger that changed the world. Thanks for watching.